Hello, my dear knitting friends around the world. Welcome to this little first video of 2025, which is actually all about 2024. A little roundup and some reflections of everything I knitted last year, everything I finished. And I'll try to make it not overly long, and in terms of all the details about each pattern, I would refer you to previous videos where I talk about modifications or extra details. So this time around, I'm hopefully going to just mention the most important details and some thoughts that I may have on some of these knits. Oh, and my name is Hille. I'm from Denmark. I neglected to mention that in my previously recorded video. I often forget to say who I am. It's like I sort of don't think it's too important. It's the knit that is important. But still, if you haven't met me before, it might be nice to know. So there you go. Oh, and I also go by Hella if you're not Danish speaking. I'm so glad you're here. I've been watching some of these Everything I Knitted 2024 videos myself, and I think it's always quite interesting, especially when people deduce some things based on their knits. You know, what worked out, what didn't work out, what to do this year, etc. Thank you so much for turning on this video, and if you've been here before, you know that I like to start with a quote. If you haven't, I like to start with a quote. And I've just got two brief quotes before we head directly into the knitting. And they're brought to us by two Germans today. Well, one of them is actually kind of he was born in Prague, but is an Austrian German. And that's Rainer Maria Rilke, who said, "And now we welcome the new year, full of things that have never been." And of course, as all good quotes, they can be related to many different things. Of course, to life, first and foremost, but also to creativity, to the things that we plan to knit. Things that have never been will come into being this year, perhaps. And that's exciting. The other quote is by Meister Eckhart, a German mystic and theologian from the 13th century, who said, "Be willing to be a beginner every morning." And I really like that quote. To me, it signals that we should sometimes try to let go of any desire or need to be an expert, to have all the answers, and to try to cultivate a beginner's mind, because that will enable us to sort of walk down a path of curiosity. And curiosity is always a really good sort of guiding light, I find. The ability to learn something new and make new things come into being, I think that could be, for me anyway, something to try to take with me into this new year. Of course, I'm probably also going to make things that are comforting and stuff, but also something new. And this is actually a little weird, considering I'm going to talk about the things that I already made last year. But I find that things that I made tend to be sort of a springboard for what I want to make in the future. So without further ado, allow me to start, and I'm just going to show the finished garment or project and mention some brief details about it, and I might add some clips where I'm wearing it, and then we'll move on to the next one. I'm going to show them in chronological order, and the very first one I knitted last year was the Gerda sweater by Aegyo. It was a test knit, and it was this this is like completely droopy, slouchy. Kind of a turtleneck sweater with cables and some basket weave stitch. Raglan sweater knitted from the top down, seamless. And a rather large slouchy turtleneck that I sometimes just let slouch like that, and sometimes I fold it over. I knitted it not in the original yarn that the testers and the designer knitted in, because I think the original yarn is spinny and silk mohair, both from Især, 2 strands held together. I knitted mine in Merlin, another Især yarn, which is to me a little softer. And the colors are 61 for the Merlin and 62 for the silk mohair. Both are this kind of corally rose. I think I remember the Merlin is a little more rose and the silk mohair a little more coral. The gauge is 20 stitches by 30 rows before blocking, 19 by 31 after blocking. I used a 4.5 millimeter to achieve that gauge. It grew quite a lot when I washed and blocked it, but I really like that. I like the sort of slouchy luxe style. It's really comfortable, but I think it's also quite stylish. And if you've been here before, I probably wax on about that a bit, but I like where those two kind of intersect. Those are words that you will probably hear on repeat here. I'm also going to add some things that I forgot to add the first time round for many of these patterns. And oh, by the way, I'll do the one I'm wearing at the very end because it's the one I finished last. And to me, it makes sense to do it in chronological order. Also because I will be adding a little more details about this pattern and another one that I finished because I haven't talked about them before after having finished them. Okay, just a few more details on this. It weighs 439 grams, and I forget how many balls of each yarn I used, but maybe that would give you an indication. If nothing else, refer to the original pattern, and it's probably similar to that. The circumference, the chest circumference is 110 centimeters, which gives me positive ease of about 20 centimeters or 8 inches, which is quite a lot. But this one has a lot of drape, so for me it's nice to have quite a bit of ease in something that has a lot of drape and is not too thick. I really still love this sweater. I have worn it over some sort of wide pants, sort of wide pleated pants. I've worn it with black and with off-white, and it changes the look of it quite a bit, and I really enjoy it. I tend to wear a little scarf in the neck, around my neck, because there's silk mohair in it, and that does feel a little itchy on my skin, on my neck especially. But I've worn it quite a lot. I really enjoy this type of sweater, the silhouette, and I like the color, I like the stitch pattern. So this has definitely been a winner for me. Right, that was the Gerda sweater. The next garment that I finished last year was the Eurus slipover, also designed by Aegyo. I test knitted it, and if you've been here before, you'll know that there's been quite a few test knits by Aegyo that I've participated in, and I hope to be able to do so again, but I would like also to try other designers, just so if there's a heavy amount of Aegyo designs here. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. And I do love their/her designs, so that's why. This is the Eurus slipover. As some of you know, this is knitted from side to side, like the Eurus sweater. I used pure Lana, 7 balls of pure Lana and 3 balls of cashmere lace, both by Gepard yarn, in a light gray color. You can find details about which numbers exactly on Ravelry. But let me see. Yeah, it's so you start down here, you knit this, and then you make increases along the way, and towards the end you pick up for neckband and sleeves and hem. So a very interesting construction, and then these little toggle buttons. The gauge is 21 stitches by 25 rows in the honeycomb pattern. And when I mention the gauge, it's of course over 10 centimeters and 4 inches. I'm not going to repeat that every time. I used a 5.5 millimeter for the body and a 4.5 for the ribbing, which means I actually went up a needle size. I also made a few modifications, which you can hear about in the video where I talk about it, or you can check my notes on Ravelry. It's difficult to measure the circumference a little here because the sides here, they fold over, and then there's the buttons, and I'm not quite sure where to measure from, but approximately from this side to the same place on the other side, mine measures 106 centimeters, which gives me a positive ease of 16 centimeters or 6¼ inches. And I believe I made the smallest size. Oh, and for the Gerda sweater, I believe I made the second size. I have worn it quite a bit. It has turned out for me to be a kind of transitional piece because I've worn it over some crisp white shirts or a black crisp shirt, And that means that my arms are not necessarily quite as warm as my body, obviously, which means it's good for those in between seasons like early spring or the fall. And I quite like that. That means also you can have it sort of under like a coat or a trench coat or something, and you can't actually tell whether it's a sweater or a slipover or a vest. So it's a really good piece for that. It's also something where I've used slouchy gray pants, but also jeans. So for me, I feel like it's kind of it's comfortable, but it's like a low-key statement piece in this gray color, and I like that as well. So very happy with this, and it was the first time I knitted a vest, but definitely not the last. I really enjoy this, and also I like the Pura Lana. It gives it a good drape. The original by the designer and the other testers was knitted in Woolia by Gepard Garn, and I think Kitsita, and I purposely chose cashmere lace instead of Kitsita, the silk mohair from Gepard Garn, because that tends to be a little scratchy for me or itchy. And I also wanted a little more drape than the Woolia, which makes things a little more stiff, I find. And I'm quite happy with this. It does still itch a little up here, but if I have a shirt underneath, that's no problem. Right, that was the Eurus slipover. Okay, so my next finished object was my first shawl, and it was the Javelin shawl by Titi Lutzak. This massive, and I'm gonna have to be careful here because it tends to change color completely. This massive shawl, I guess it's a crescent shaped shawl. I knitted it in La Bien-Aimée Merino DK in the color Winterfell, and I think it's if I recall correctly, I think it's a superwash yarn, and I think back when I first bought this yarn, is it 2 years ago? Yeah, about 2 years ago. I still wasn't quite sure about the whole superwash thing, and one of the most important things for me then, as now, was that it said this yarn is next to skin soft. Okay, I can't say that about many yarns, and I knew that I wanted to. I didn't actually know at the time that I wanted to knit a shawl in it, but when I decided to use the yarn for this shawl, I knew it would be good for having it close to my neck, because like a lot of us, I think this is where my skin is most sensitive. I used about 3.5 skeins. It weighs 416 grams. The gauge is 16 stitches by 30 rows, and I used a 5mm, which is one needle size up from the pattern. I have to say I haven't used it all that much. I still think it's really gorgeous. I love it, and I love the moody color, and I think the design is just beautiful. Part of the reason is that I'm still a little unsure or hesitant about styling it, and I think we tend to use scarves more in Denmark than shawls, and I think this shawl and my other shawl I'll show a little later are much more well, I'm certainly prouder of them. I think they're more beautiful than my Sophie shawl, which is really a scarf. But that's the one I tend to use more, because you just sort of twirl it around you and there you go, you're out the door. It doesn't really require anything. Whereas this one, I'm constantly kind of going, oh, where to put the one tip, etc. But I think that could also be because I've just not gotten used to it. I need to figure out how to do it, and I really like styling it with something that signals something more modern, like a leather jacket, whereas this is a little more sort of traditional, I guess. But all in all, loved the pattern. It was really fun to make. It was also long time in the making, and I absolutely adore the color Winterfell, and I would like to knit more in that color. I think it's just beautiful. It's this dark, difficult to place kind of blue. You can't see it here. It looks lighter. This is probably closer. Hopefully you will be able to see something that looks close to the real color in the clips. But that was my first shawl, and I found it really enjoyable. It was nice for once to knit something where I didn't necessarily need to meet gauge, and I didn't have to worry about the fit, are the sleeves tight, is it too short? all of that. So I definitely really enjoyed that. The next project I made, well, that was a bit of a saga. And that was this purple beauty. By Aegyo. It's the Aegyo sweater. I knitted it in Puno by Ppoppo, a blown yarn in the purple color 604, and I weighed it, and it weighs 465 grams, which means you can kind of from that deduce how much yarn is actually used. I probably used, or I did use more, but I made all sorts of alterations when I found out it was too wide. You can hear more about that in a previous video. For now, let me just say that I'm really happy with how it ultimately came out. I have worn this quite a lot. It's nice when you're a yoga teacher to just sort of throw this over before you go to class, or if it's a yin class and it's a little chilly. Perfect sweater to just throw over. It's comfortable, it's slouchy, it's squishy, it's soft, and there's something going on the front here, so I quite like that. And the rest is half fisherman's rib. The gauge is 14 stitches by 24 rows, and I used a 6mm needle for that as per the pattern. And my circumference, even though I actually made it smaller, is still 120 centimeters, which gives me a positive ease of 30 centimeters or 12 inches. But I find that it works. There's something about the stitch that makes it work. And I also made the sleeves a little smaller, which you can hear. And you think, sleeves smaller? Well, yes, they were bigger. But I really love this sweater. I've gotten a lot of compliments on it also. And someone complimented on it only last week. And adding that, oh my gosh, I really want to learn to knit. I'm like, well, yeah, I think you should. So yeah, I don't necessarily wear it super often because of the color. It's absolutely the only thing I have in purple in my wardrobe, but I found that I'm warming to the color, even though I'm at heart somebody who enjoys gray and neutrals. But I found that it was actually quite enjoyable, and I liked making a cable sweater in a color that was very sort of atypical from your usual cable sweaters. Okay, you know what? The next project I'm just going to put on because I'm feeling a little bit hot in this sweater, which by the way is also Puno. I'll talk about it a little later. I usually begin the sessions, I'm sorry for the casualness of this, I usually begin the sessions with a little weather spiel, and I completely forgot about that today, which is odd because I've been thinking about it just moments before. But yesterday we had snow. In the middle of the night, or during most of the night, we had a complete, there was a storm. You know, my partner had to move from upstairs to downstairs and sleep on a mattress because the whole house was like, it felt like it was just sort of rocking on its foundation. And today it's 10 degrees Celsius. Go figure. Which means, frankly, it's a little warm here, if not downright hot. So I'm just going to leave off that sweater for a little while. And might throw on the next one if you don't mind. This is the Ppoppo jacket. The only cardigan I made this year. What's up with that? Definitely want to make more cardigans. I think everybody says that. I don't know why we tend to not do that. But this was another test knit for Aegyo. I used 2 strands of Isa yarn trio 1, or 1 strand of that plus 1 strand of Isa silk mohair. The trio 1, I used 3 skeins, and the color was a sage or gray. And the silk mohair, I used 9 skeins, and the color was 2S and a gray. It wasn't really sage, it was just basically gray. The fact that I can open this, even though I now have wool on my arms, is the very reason why I want to make more cardigans. So even though I'm hot, I can sort of just, make a little personal air condition here, which is just really nice. Anyway, the gauge was 18 stitches by 28 rows in double moss stitch. And I have to say that does stretch quite a bit, which means my sleeves were quite long. They were like down to here after I first dried it, blocked it. And then I think I read somewhere, I forget where, maybe actually in the pattern, that if I gave it a little spin in the washer or or actually in the dryer, it would maybe shrink up a little, and I did that. Blocked it, washed and blocked it again, and the sleeves crawled back just maybe 2 or 3 centimeters. So that's nice. They're still really big and slouchy, bell-like, but now they don't go down here. So consider that a recommendation. I used a 5.5 millimeter. The pattern uses a 6. And I think I was afraid that it was going to drape even more. The circumference, it's very difficult to measure this one because of course it's meant to sort of fold over here, but you can see that it's very wide. So I measured it when it was lying flat, and it measured 75 centimeters from sleeve to sleeve, which means 150 centimeters in all, and that would give me 60 centimeters of positive ease, or about 23.5 inches. And of course, you can't quite say that that's what it gives you, because this is double, and this is sometimes how I've worn it with a little pin here. So difficult to check, even though I actually made the smallest size. So it's obviously quite oversized. It weighs 346 grams. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I have to say, it's sometimes a little tricky if I don't use a pin, because it tends to sort of hang loosely or something. But it's all right if I use it, for instance, as a transitional piece when it's not too cold. And as I said, I have used it with a kind of large safety pin kind of looking thing. So that's been really useful. And I like the combination of the trio plus the silk mohair. It creates a really nice fabric. Just make sure whenever we create something in double moss stitch, it will lengthen quite a bit once you wash and block it. Right, the next thing I made was the Trellis sweater by Pia Trans, a Danish designer, which is this light, airy, fluffy garment that weighs all of 159 grams. I used the yarn called Fluffy by A Knitter's World in the undyed colorway, and I used about 3.5 skeins holding 2 strands together, and it creates a really lovely soft fabric, super lovely and super soft. And of course, one thing that most knitters know by now, depending on if you're a complete beginner, you may not know. I didn't know for a long time, but apparently the softer the yarn, the greater the tendency to pill. And sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't matter. If I don't wear something that's knitted in a soft yarn, I'm not going to wear it. So for me, the fact that something pills is less important because I want to wear it. But this does tend to pill a bit. But in this particular color, it's not that visible because it's already kind of a heathered kind of color. I've used this so much. It's probably one of my most worn sweaters or blouses, I'm tempted to call it this year. Partly because it's so soft. I can wear it next to skin, and I can't say that about many yarns, as I mentioned. And also because it's a neutral. It's so lovely. I really like this kind of grayish. And also because it's light, it's airy, it's not too warm. I've also used this quite a lot just to throw over yoga clothes or throw over when I was just briefly going out because it kind of styles itself. You know, you throw it over a long sleeve t-shirt and there you go, over a pair of jeans. It just looks cozy and it's comfortable, but it also looks nice. There's a simple trellis pattern here, hence the name. The gauge is 15 stitches by 20 rows. I used a 5.5 millimeter. The pattern uses 6. I wanted the fabric to be slightly denser. I also made it a little less oversized. I knitted the size 1. And the circumference is 106 centimeters, which gives me a positive ease of 16 centimeters or 6.25 inches. I also like that the hem doesn't cinch in. It's just been a really wearable garment. Okay, the next sweater that I made. I made mostly sweaters, 2 shawls, a bag, and 3 small scarves. So definitely need to get more into accessories maybe. Okay, so the next finished sweater was the crystal sweater by Helga Isager, Danish designer, the daughter of Marianne Isager, and of course part of the whole Isager yarn empire, I'm tempted to call them. But this is not knitted in Isa yarn. This is knitted in Sonder yarn by Sonder and Co. I think they're called now. Sunday Morning DK in the color Window Shopping, plus Halo, which is their silk mohair, in the color Glass. 3 skeins of the Sunday Morning DK and 2 skeins of the silk mohair. The sweater weighs in all 336 grams. The gauge is 15 stitches by 21 rows, and for that I used 5.5 and 6 millimeter needles. I made size 1, but for the sleeves I made size 2 because I felt they were too narrow. And also I did a few modifications. I made 1 or 2 extra repeats because I didn't meet row gauge. The circumference of this is 108 centimeters, which gives me a positive ease of 18 centimeters or 7 inches. And I have to say, I think I finished it in August. And I, for some reason, haven't managed to wear it a whole lot. One of the reasons is that I think the halo is a little scratchy, and this is an open neck. So I have to wear a t-shirt with it where I can exactly where the neckline here doesn't touch my skin. But I have another sweater where that's been knitted in a silk mohair that also initially felt scratchy to me, and I've worn it quite a lot. So over time, it's somehow become less scratchy. And I don't think it's because my skin gets used to it. I think it's because it tends to become a little sort of less fluffy on the inside. I hope that's why, which means I can do that for this one as well. But I really enjoyed the knit, even though it was bottom up and a little tricky and not exactly a pattern that holds your hand, but it's pretty okay. And I really enjoyed the Sonder yarn. I think it's just a beautiful color. I absolutely love this color. And also the yarn is special because when I bought it, the only reason I bought it was that I knew Carmen from the Knitting a Good Yarn podcast was coming to Denmark, so she could bring it with her. And that's a lovely memory. So yeah, the Crystal Sweater by Helga Isager. The next thing I made was the Ample Tee by Visenit, a Danish designer. Oh, what's front and back here? I can't remember. Anyway, it's this slouchy silk summer top. It doesn't look like much when it's not worn, but it has this sort of a slouchy feel, and you can probably tell here that it's silk. As I said, by Visenit, and the yarn is mulberry silk from A Knitter's World. I used 3 skeins in the color Cherry Blossom, held double. The top weighs 308 grams, so it's very sort of drapey, and it has a slight halo. I don't know if you can tell. It's super soft. Oh my gosh. Talk about next to skin soft. Of course it's silk, but it's really lovely. I went down to a 3.5 millimeter needle. The pattern calls for 4 millimeter. That's because the 2 yarns I held together made it a thicker sort of strand or yarn to use than the one called for in the pattern. The gauge is 22 stitches by 29 rows, and I achieved an approximate circumference of 108 centimeters, which gives me 18 centimeters of positive ease or 7 inches. And I wore it quite a lot last summer. I found it really elegant and relaxed at the same time. I can't wear it if it's very hot because it is relatively thick. On the other hand, I have bare arms. So ideally I would knit some kind of summer cardigan and throw over, or a shawl or something, probably a cardigan. On the other hand, maybe a shawl because the arm opening here is quite wide. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's a different construction and another new designer, and it was interesting to knit something by her. And I really, really, really love the yarn, and I also really enjoyed the pattern. And it's one of only 2 summer tops that I made. I tend to not make very many summer tops. Partly I find it really difficult to find tops that where I think it's worth the while, because I I'm a little afraid to look maybe a little frumpy, and I'm also afraid that it's not going to be something I'm going to wear, because in the summer it's obviously hotter. Oh, yarn in my eyelashes. Which means I will likely often just prefer a simple t-shirt and not something knitted. But I have become better. The first year I knitted, I didn't knit any summer garments at all, so I have improved. Anyway, that was the ample tee. The next thing I knitted was a bag, the Sarang bag. And it was my first bag, but definitely not my last. It was fun to knit something completely different. I used 6 skeins of Lang yarns Creolino in the natural or undyed color. I held the yarn triple because you want it to be sturdy. And it weighs 221 grams. It was a really nice knit. You start at the bottom, knit this lace pattern all the way up, and then you make the straps. And the gauge is 15 stitches by 23 rows on 4mm needle. I did not swatch. I used the recommended needle size. It's a bag after all. It comes in 2 sizes. I made the larger size. You can knit a smaller one where I think the strap is an I-cord. And I was really happy that I made this. I love the basket kind of color, if you will. And it was really nice to make something that I could actually use, and no matter what I wear it with. This is one of those colors where you can just, it suits everything. And it's very sort of summery in the color and in the stitch pattern. And I got quite a lot of compliments when I brought this out with me. And it fits a surprising number of things in there, and it's been really useful, and it's certainly not my last bag. Did I mention it was by Aegyo? The other summer top I made last summer was the Agave. I think it was at the end of summer where I made this. Patterned by Yumiko Alexander with this lovely lace detail and sort of dainty lacy sleeves. And I used Sandnes Garn Line in the color Pearl Gray 3820. And I used 5 balls. It weighs 233 grams. And I made the second size. The gauge is 15.5 stitches by 23 rows. And I used a 5.5mm. Their circumference is 102 centimeters, which gives me a positive ease of 12 centimeters or 4 3/4 inches. If you think this looks a little on the short side, I would absolutely agree with you. I'm not sure if it's because of the yarn, but mine did not, even though I blocked it to measurements as per the pattern, it somehow looked shorter and slightly more cropped than the version in her pattern where she wears it in white. And I have to say, if I were to knit this again, or if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't knit it in line. I would probably knit it in something where there's a tendency for it to maybe not drape more because it is drapey. Or maybe I would just make another pattern repeat before I split for sleeves, before I put a stitch marker and indicate this is where the sleeve starts. Or I would maybe knit it in a silk blend or a silk yarn. But I do think, the Line was very inexpensive, and I like the color, and it's not like I don't like the yarn. It's just that I find the pattern really beautiful, and the yarn doesn't, to me, quite live up to that. I would have enjoyed something more of maybe a silk linen blend. But I do like it. I have worn it with sort of wide-legged, black, thin linen pants. So yeah, enjoyable, but I really enjoyed knitting the pattern. And Yumiko Alexander has a lot of really beautiful summer tops. I would definitely feel tempted to knit one of them, another one of them, but then I probably would not use Line, but something a little different. Okay, the next thing I knitted was the Seoul blouse. Seoul as in the capital of South Korea. I test knitted this as well. This is patterned by Aegyo, and it's knitted in a combination of gepard garn, hørsilke or linen silk, with a strand of cashmere lace. So it's a very luxurious yarn blend, obviously. I used 5 skeins of the off-white linen silk blend, 2 skeins of it in the black color, and then 3 skeins of the cashmere lace in off-white, 1 in black. For this unusual colorwork design. It was a little tricky to knit at first because you start by knitting flat. So the first 2 rows are knitted flat, you knit colorwork flat, and then you join, and then you knit it in the round, which becomes a little easier. But after a while, it was actually, it was not as difficult as I expected, and I learned how to work colorwork flat in a new way, which was interesting. There's more details on Ravelry, but the garment in all weighs 232 grams. It's very sort of drapey with this yarn combination. My goodness, it's dark suddenly. I apologize if it looks really dark on screen. Suddenly it just looks really dark in here. Clouds pass by the sun and it becomes darker. I often hear podcasters say, "Oh, sorry, it becomes darker," when I can't tell a difference. So I don't know how much you can tell. I hope you can at least see what I'm showing you here. Anyway, the gauge is 20 stitches by 29 rows. For that I used a 4.5 millimeter. I think the pattern may suggest more for color work. I typically don't go up for color work because I tend to stretch my stitches more so that I don't need to go up. I made the first size and it gives me a circumference of 114 centimeters across. And that gives me a positive ease of 24 centimeters or 9.5 inches. And I forget when I made this, maybe in September or something. I think, yeah, it was in September. So it fairly quickly became cool afterwards, but it was really perfect for that transitional weather where you can no longer wear short sleeves, but the big sort of woolly pullovers are still too hot or too warm. So this was actually perfect, and I love the drape of it, love the style of it, relaxed yet somehow luxurious. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I also really like the color combination here, the kind of high contrast. I often really enjoy something low contrast, for instance, gray plus blue. But here I really enjoyed the very sort of the high contrast because the stripes kind of look like Oriental script. And I think that underlined it here. So it looks a little like ink on parchment. At least I got that vibe. The next thing I knitted was the Lunae shawl by Natasha Hornby. Probably the project that challenged me the most this year. Possibly also the one I'm proudest of. One that's been in my queue since I first saw it a couple of years ago. Mosaic knitting. And I used wool folk yarn, 2 skeins of the off-white, color 1, 2 skeins of the greenish gray, which, by the way, is not greenish at all. That's just what they call it, color 2, and 2 skeins of dark charcoal gray, color 33. All in all, it weighs all but 236 grams, which is quite a bit less than the other shawl I have. It's very light because the yarn is thin, hence the name tynd, which means thin in Danish. It has a gauge of 29 stitches by 32 rows, and it calls for a 3.75 millimeter. And I used that on one end, and on the other I used 4 millimeter because I only had one 3.75 needle. And it worked out. I really enjoy the colors. I really enjoyed the fabric. I've worn it a few times, but I'm a little too scared to wear it too much because I have a little hunch that maybe the tynd is going to pill easily, and I don't want to be all, sort of fidgeting with it around my neck, taking it on and off and on and off during a day when I exit and enter certain places. So I have not used it as much as I would like, but that's not to say I'm not going to. I just sort of need to be better at, as I said previously, styling my shawls. So I love the colors. It's right down my alley, and I like the slouchy, beautiful feel of it. So yeah, I'm just going to keep that on for a little while. All in all, I'm really happy with this. It was a very enjoyable knit, and I felt I upped my knitting game a little by knitting this, especially When I got to this mosaic chart, it took a really long time, but the pattern was exceptionally clear, beautiful pattern. So I definitely really enjoyed that. The next garment that I knitted was the Boreas sweater, another test knit by Aegyo in this beautiful anthracite blue color. I used about 11 balls of Snifnook, which is a really lovely yarn. It's also a blown yarn, and it's really soft. It's a little softer to me than Puno. I'm not sure why. I think it has cotton rather than polyamide as the core. No, the tube that the yarn is blown into. It's a little heavy. It weighs 538 grams, and I think it's because once you knit cables with a really dense yarn on a small needle, 4.5, it becomes heavy, but I don't mind at all. I love wearing it. The gauge is 19 stitches by 28 rows, as I said, on 4.5 millimeter. It has a circumference of 108 centimeters, giving me a positive ease of 18 centimeters or 7 inches. And I've been so happy with this. I have really, really been happy with this. It's a beautiful design. I'm glad I modified it and made it slightly smaller, even though I have 18 centimeters of positive ease. I really, really love the color, really love the yarn, really love the neck opening. There's just so much I like about this sweater. I've worn it a lot, and I've gotten quite a lot of compliments on it. It differs to me a little from my other sweaters, both in the color and that neck opening, so I really appreciate that. Beautiful design, if you ask me. And then I made this sweater for my daughter, which is a variation of the Sook Moon sweater by Aegyo. I knitted the so-called original Sook Moon sweater a year and a half ago or something like that, in 2 strands. One was Wild and Soft by Ppoppo, which is silk and wool, silk merino. The other was the Kitsita, where you alternate holding them together and holding the Kitsita by itself, giving it a sort of stripy but unicolor effect. Here my daughter, she'd sort of taken over that sweater, has worn it quite a lot. And I asked her if I could knit her something, and she said, I'd like something else like that, just a little smaller and maybe in some other colors and striped. So this is a very light sweater. I think it's like the lightest thing I've made so far. It weighs 149 grams, which means a total of, let me just see. I used 2 strands of Tilia silk mohair from Filkalana throughout. One color is the ice blue, the other is the snow white, and I used 3 balls of each, which means 6 in all, which means it was not a very expensive sweater. It's easy to make and also relatively quickly. You make increases along the raglans here, and I made the neckline on the same size needle as the body and not on a smaller needle as per the pattern, because she wanted it a little sort of open and slouchy. She also wanted me to start with the blue and finish with the blue. Luckily that worked out, and each stripe is 10 rows. And the gauge for this is 18 stitches by 23 rows on a 4.5 millimeter needle. I made the first size this time round. Last time I made the second size. The circumference is 100 centimeters. For me, that would only mean about 10 centimeters or 4 inches of positive ease. For her, I'm not sure how much. I'll try to see if I can snap a picture of her. I imagine that she's got at least maybe 6 centimeters more of positive ease or something like that. 3 inches. Maybe, I don't know. Now I can't remember where I attached the new color. I think it must have been under the sleeve. But I know that I used a technique that I first learned when I knitted sweater number 12 by My Favorite Things Knitwear, to avoid a jog, where once you attach the new color, you knit a row or round in that color, and when you meet it again, the first stitch on round number 2, you knit into the stitch below, and yeah, that does it. It seems not necessarily intuitive, but it worked. So I don't have I can't see a jog. Not a very clear one at least. This is the side that I attached it on. I think it's fairly seamless. Yeah. In my black version, I made quite a few. I made short rows as per the pattern, which makes the final stripe slightly more, or it makes the sweater longer in the very back. She didn't want that for this one. So here you can see that the back, let me see. This is the front hem. This is the back. So I only made a few short rows, and I did it in the ribbing. She only wanted it to be slightly longer in the back. That way she can tell what the back is. I've also added a little bow in the yarn, which I often do. Oh, and yeah, for detail, there's a twisted rib, which is, I think, kind of an essential part of a simple pattern. And I found it just really, it was nice to knit something as simple and undemanding after I knitted shawls and cables and things like that, or mosaic and cables. So yeah, she's worn it quite a lot. It's a really good color combination for her, and yeah, I could see myself knitting others. She's also been enjoying a couple of Sophie scarves that I knitted for her, and I haven't followed the pattern for the Sophie scarf because I'd already bought the Sophie shawl, which I knitted in 2023. So I just pretty much interpreted that for a shorter version. Here there's one where I used remains from La Bien-Aimée Cashmerino in water, the color Water Lilies, plus silk mohair by Cré de Luxe in very icy light blue. Then I made her another one in a mix of Sunday and, was that Tilia? Sunday and Midnight Soul, I think. And then finally I made her one in this leftover pink yarn I had from a project I never even knitted. So she's worn those quite a lot. They're very skinny and very short. She doesn't want them to have a whole lot of fabric. So, you know, I've just done what she likes. And they're very sort of easy to knit projects once you've engaged in more long-term projects. Okay, so I put the sun sweater back on, my last finished object from this year, or from last year. I have to remember to say that. This was also a test knit for Aegyo knit, calling for Puno, the yarn that I also used for this purple thing, and I also previously used it for my Bowie sweater that was in an upcycled colorway. It calls for either 3 or 4 different colors of the Puno, one being the main color of the body, the other being the collar, and then a contrast color. And I also added 2 more colors down here. My sweater weighs in all 345 grams, which is the equivalent of 7 balls of Puno in all. Even though if you look at my project page on Ravelry, there you'll see 7 balls of this light blue and then 1, of course, of each of the others, which makes it seem like I used 7 or 10 balls of yarn, and I did not. So I used, this one is color 710, the light blue, which I also used up here. This color is 190, or brown, which is it's like a coffee. I think it's called coffee, actually. And then there's the off-white, which is color 101. And then there's the 2 extra I added, which I did absolutely not need to add, was the this color right here, which is the natural or undyed, 145, and then a little blip of jeans blue in here, color 734. And now I'm just going to fold down the collar because it becomes so warm when the collar stands up like that. Puno is also a blown yarn like Sniff Nook that I use for my Boreas, and it's also very soft. It's a little itchier up here, as I mentioned, but it tends to soften over time, I find. The gauge is 15 stitches by 16 rows, and it calls for a 6 millimeter or 6 millimeter for the color work and 5.5 for the body. I used that and I made size 2. If I had known what I know now, it's often like that, isn't it? I would have either gone up a needle size or made the 3rd size. It's not that I don't like this fit. It's quite lovely. I probably should have made it maybe a tiny bit longer. On the other hand, I don't want all my sweaters to hit my hips at the same place. So I quite enjoy this. But okay, here's something that I have become aware of when knitting color work on circular yokes. I've looked at lots of other color work sweaters also on Ravelry because there weren't any projects with this garment, obviously, when I first started test knitting it. So I've looked at other garments for a few other projects I have in mind. And one of the things I've noticed is that, for instance, on Caroline, the designer's first, when I saw her photos, this line or her color work ends like this much further down on her arms or chest. Partly maybe because she has narrower shoulders, but also because she knits more loosely, which means her row gauge is very different. So maybe I could have achieved that if I'd gone up like 0.5 millimeter or maybe even a whole or 2 needle sizes, or chosen a bigger size. But I'm not sure that would have made a difference. That would have just made it wider, perhaps, giving me more stitches that way and not created more depth. So I've thought about how one could, how could you alleviate that? Because after I'd knitted this, I'll get into some of the other details. After I'd knitted this, I was just really looking at colorwork sweaters on Ravelry, and I noticed that some of the ones I really liked, the first picture that I saw, the pattern would typically end somewhere down here, and then I saw certain people's colorwork ending up here, where they'd apparently had the same issue as me, where you don't meet row gauge, which means the pattern only makes up about maybe 1/3 of the sweater rather than almost half of it. And I tend to like it when it ends further down. I made the 2nd size, which means my circumference is 104 centimeters, which gives me 14 centimeters of positive ease, or 5.5 inches. And I achieved that by blocking it quite aggressively. And that's because I realized probably a little too late that I probably should have swatched. Shame on me. I swatch always, except for Sophie's scarves and a shawl. Actually, I did swatch for the Lunae shawl, but I almost always swatch because I want a garment to fit the way I'd like it to. And I didn't for this. The reason being that the designer and the other testers used this yarn plus a strand of Kitsita silk mohair. And I opted not to do that, partly because, as I mentioned previously, it's a little itchy for me, and for a turtleneck, obviously that, I wouldn't be able to wear it as much. And also it would make the sweater even hotter, even warmer, and this is already warm enough for me. So I potentially wouldn't get so much use out of it if I used an extra strand of silk mohair. And I figured if I didn't use that, then surely I should not go up in needle size, but maybe I should have after all. I don't know. I mean, I like it. I certainly do like it, but I also like a more slouchy version. So I do have a bit of yarn left over, not enough for the main body here, but I was tempted to knit another version with another yarn combo. If I were to do that, I probably would also make the neck a little shorter. It calls for, I think, 12 centimeters. This is 10.5 centimeters. And something else. The reason why it may work for Caroline or anybody else who knits more loosely is that once you knit more loosely, and certainly for the bigger sizes, this is going to pull out more, much more, which means that the neckline is not going to be as high. This is going to fold over more. Of course, I didn't want the neck to be all the way out here, but I would have liked it just a little further down. And no matter how much I stretched it, I couldn't achieve that. So I probably should have gone up a needle size. So just in case you're tempted to knit it or something else. Beware of that. I went for this color combination. Well, obviously, Carolina's aqua had already influenced it, and she'd used the brown. But I really wanted to use light blue and beige and brown again. I'd used light blue and beige and off-white and brown together already in my spot sweater some years ago, and I really wanted to use those colors again. This is not quite as muted, I have to say. It's almost a bold light blue. But I do really like it, and I love that color combination of blues and beiges, whites and browns. And I also really like the style of this. It's a slightly more contemporary version of the colorwork yoke, sort of Nordic style sweater. Sun means mountain in Korean, and these are supposed to sort of be reminiscent of mountains. When it came to the colors, Carolina used the aqua down here, only down here, and it has a really neat look. When I decided to use the light blue instead, I also wanted to introduce it up here, just so that there would be that sort of, I don't know, a strange kind of symmetry, where you introduce the color once and then it shows up further down. And then I wanted just a brief peak of another color, so I used the beige here, plus a darker blue inside. You absolutely don't have to do that. You can use scraps as long as you have yarns that are pretty much the same thickness. You could use Puno for this. You could use Nutiden. You could use lots of different unspun yarns. Oh, by the way, before I started knitting, I colored in this drawing that Carolina includes for the pattern, and you can see here that I tried different color combinations and ultimately found out that I just needed to try to knit because it would look different on paper than once knitted up. But it did still give me a pretty good indication of what colors would look good with what. And I really like having the white in between here so as to have sort of a palette cleanser before knitting a new color. So since it's a round yoke, the increases are, of course, inside the color work. And I would say that if you're a beginning knitter and you'd like to try color work, this is a really good example of something that will go by fast because it's on 6mm needle, and it's also quite easy. The yarn is really forgiving, and it's you can really quickly see progress, and you follow a diagram for the first part, and after that is just stockinette with a little bit of German short rows after the color work on the back. And then there's a twisted rib cuff and hem, which I really like, and also for the collar. You can't quite see here because it's so dark. I used a 4.5mm needle, size up from the pattern for the ribbing, and every time I added a new ball of yarn, I just inserted the thread from the previous ball into the new tube so that it would be maybe double for like 4 or 5 stitches. That worked out fine. I did have to be a little careful because there were 1 or 2 rounds where I worked 3 colors, but you don't have to do that if you use fewer colors. And there's something about the thickness of this yarn that made color dominance less important. It's like it's so forgiving. So I sometimes had one color be the dominant, sometimes the other. I chose, I think, usually, I don't actually remember what I chose, and it didn't matter so much because there's just, you cannot see through one yarn when you have the other. So in that connection also, it's not very daunting. And you can easily adjust the color complexity to 2 or 3 colors if that's what you would enjoy. And for once, I took hardly any notes. I simply followed the chart on my iPad. Didn't have a whole lot of things to keep track of, and that was actually enjoyable. I think it's one of the sweaters that's taken me the shortest to knit. It took me about 2 weeks. That's unheard of for me. I'm not a very fast knitter, despite these projects. This is hours and hours and hours. I've said that before on this channel. I'm not a fast knitter, but this one was a pretty fast project. I also just want to say for this pattern, since this is the second size and you can see it's not very big, it means that the first size is obviously smaller. And there's also a lot of other sizes. So I know Caroline has added more sizes for this. So there's a smaller size, and then there's many bigger sizes. Let me just check. The largest size goes up to a bust circumference of 165 centimeters or 65 inches. And the smallest, 100 centimeters or 39.4 inches. So yeah, that's been a very enjoyable knit. I plan to wear this quite a lot. And I wouldn't mind knitting another one. Well, I believe that was that for my 2024 knits. It was just a brief roundup, or as brief as possible. It has, of course, made me realize that I, as I said, haven't made enough cardigans. I'm planning on remedying that. And I also want to knit some designers that I have not yet, whose designs I have not yet tried. And I'd also like to knit some more different accessories, but I'm pretty happy with the designs that I've knitted last year, and I think most of them I've either worn quite a bit or I plan to wear, and there's also still a lot of yarns that I'd like to try, and new techniques that I'd like to learn, as I think most of us feel that way. So thank you so much for hanging in there. And I've been thinking about making a video where I talk about some of my plans for this year, but those plans are kind of all over the place. Some of them fairly realistic, some of them not even remotely so. So there's a lot of dream knitting. My mind tends to spin like on its own axis when it comes to thinking about what to knit, simply because it's fun. Apropos letting your curiosity lead you. So I'm not sure if I'm going to make a video of that, because I'm not sure how much of it I'm actually gonna do when it comes down to it, but I might. But anyway, thank you so much for sticking with me. If you're still here, wow, well done. Thanks so much, and I hope you got a little something out of it. Maybe just a knitting companion for your own little knitting, wherever you are in the world. And I wish you a joyous 2025, and I hope you're doing really well at your end, and thank you so much for being here. Hopefully I'll see you next time.